How the auction works is that we don't actually attempt to value the properties. That is the beauty of the auction for both buyer and seller, is that the floor, as in the auction floor, decides the value. We're very much leaving it up to the buyers. We set reserves, and reserves are very much a bottom line price that is calculated on rental income and yields thereof in most cases. Obviously we had some properties in areas like Dublin 4 and other South Dublin suburbs that were not based on rent, but they were still priced at a very attractive price. But the important thing here to emphasise is that these are the real deal reserves. These are not, this is quite different to auction systems before in Ireland, which obviously got a lot of bad press. We had guide prices and we had reserves and sale prices, obviously, that bore no relation to the guide prices. And this obviously was a big, big issue that we knew we had to get over, because certainly our UK partners, when they were looking at the Irish market over here, hadn't heard about this. Auctions in the UK are quite straightforward. The property's put up, there's a price, it sells in and around, maybe a bit above, maybe a bit less, and they're wondering what's so difficult about that. But then, historically in Ireland, we had a system whereby you used to have guide prices, and a vendor was, basically going to instruct an auctioneer not to sell their property below a certain price, and that price was generally a lot higher than the guide price. So for instance, if you had a guide price of €400,000 and you went into the auction room and you were a bidder at €600,000 and the auctioneer was telling you still couldn't buy it, that's very frustrating. As a buyer, it's very frustrating. You go in, you've done all your preparation, you've paid your surveyor, you've paid your solicitor to review the contracts, you've possibly paid your accountant to help get you involved in the finance. And this obviously had a very bad press, and they brought recommendations in to change guide prices to A and Bs, which is basically a guide price with a different ribbon on it. So we really wanted to cut through all that, very much with a buyer's focus in mind. We wanted to make it very transparent, so we actually issued prices that were indications of the reserve. So the reserve price on the day was never going to exceed the price that was in the catalogue. And we felt this was very, very important for transparency, because in the current market that we're in, there is basically zero transparency out there. Nobody knows what a property is worth. Nobody knows what a vendor really wants for their property. You go to Daft, you go to My Home, you go to various places and you find a price. You still have no idea what that person really wants for that property. And you're sort of starting at the top, working down. Whereas if you know what the real absolute bottom line is, and you know that if you're a buyer at that level and nobody has outbid you, you will buy that property. That's, we think, very, very crucial, and we think that was one of the reasons why it was such a success. We did sell 81 out of 82 properties. We had 81 contracts signed and deposits paid, not like where you see a new homes launch where people come along and they come to a property launch and they see 80 properties, say, and they will put a booking deposit down, but a booking deposit is fully refundable, as anyone who's done it knows, and certainly from a vendor's perspective, you don't actually have sales until you have contracts signed. But it does give a level of formality and finality for a purchaser as well. You know you have bought that at that price. You now know where you stand. You know that you are going to have that property in 4 weeks. You can move in, you can do what you like with it. It's all done and dusted in a very sort of clean and efficient manner. And that's the plus side. I suppose the hard work side of it is what was touched on earlier by Paula as well, which is that you really have to do your due diligence before the auction, and we make no bones about that. We have it written absolutely everywhere. It's in a very large pre-auction announcement that every property that is sold under the hammer is done so at the buyer's risk. We make every effort to disclose all the legal documents. We have all the properties open once a week, every week leading up to the auction, so that there's plenty of opportunities to view the properties. Surveyors can be brought down. We're happy for all the properties to be inspected and surveyed. We upload all the legal documents to the best of our ability, depending on the solicitors have them, for download, so that all the contracts can be viewed. So, basically you have to do all your work prior to the auction to be able to bid on a property that is at what is considered a lower price than perhaps what people's opinion of value might be. Now, the interesting thing was, I'll give you maybe a few statistics from the last auction, having done our analysis of it. There was 81 properties sold. The reserve prices were a certain amount and the sale prices were another. The average was 30%. The average sale price was 30% above the reserve price across the board. Now, that varied though. We had a number of properties that sold right on the button on the reserve, and we had other properties that sold, in some cases, 2.5 times the reserve. But I suppose that's an indication that that's what the market value is for the property. You know, the beauty of an auction is you can stop bidding whenever you want. You bid up to whatever the level you feel comfortable, and you can pull away. So if someone else wants to pay more, then that's up to them. I mean, we had some funny sort of instances on the day where, I don't know if anyone was here, but Gary Murphy, who's our partner over in the UK, was the auctioneer, and you know, he's a good character, and he's able to sort of interact and make everyone feel quite comfortable. I mean, we had one instance where, okay, it is granted some people do get caught up in the moment, but we had a certain amount of bidding that was going on. It was for a pharmacy we had down the country, and there was 3 or 4 bidders starting off, and 2 of them fell off, and it was back down to 2, and it was a certain gentleman to the left and a gentleman to the right, and it was 310, 320, 330, 340. Came to the end, and he hummed and he hawed, and he went one more, and 350. Back to you, sir, and he hummed and he hawed. No, and he says, I'll tell you what, I'll leave it for the other man. And so Gary goes back to the chap, see, he's left it for you, isn't that wonderful? He says, I bet you're delighted he came. He's paid about 100,000 more than when he started bidding. But that's the reality, that's the auction. Everyone's entitled to bid as they see fit. Everyone we spoke to, certainly from a buyer's perspective, because we were obviously in communication with a lot of the buyers afterwards, were thrilled with their purchase. They all felt they had got good value. They were generally in a cash buying situation. Generally, although the funny thing is, and you might be interested to know this, Paula, that since the auctions happened, we had a number of valuers inspecting the properties for valuations for banks, for finance.
That's interesting.
So there were actually a number of people, and see, we're not always going to know that, because obviously, you know, people don't feel obliged to tell us where they're getting the finance, and we don't ask. But we make it very clear to everyone that you must have your finance in place. Because, you know, the contracts are not subject to finance, not subject to survey, they're not subject to contract and title, to due diligence. So you must have your finance in place. But, you know, to touch on that, you mentioned something, Paul, that I can just maybe clarify slightly. You mentioned that everybody, or the majority, were investors. It actually wasn't the case. The majority were perhaps cash buyers, but there was quite a large number of owner-occupiers who were buying at the auction. I see a lot of people have sold in the last number of years and have been renting since, and have been renting and waiting for the market to be right for them. You know, they have their own ideas as what the price of a property should be, and you know, a lot of these people, in fairness, are, you know, and it's good to see they're doing their research, they're watching data, they're watching the sales results, they're talking to agents, and they're watching prices, particularly in an area that they have an eye on. And so some of the properties in the auction came up in their areas of choice. And obviously, you know, the reserves, we set the reserves very, very realistically and very attractively. And as I say, they weren't just guides, they were the real reserves that sold at those prices. And so they decided to go for it. And so they have their finance practically in place. Then obviously they have to ring their contact in their broker or in their bank and get the wheels in motion. But all the hard work had been done, the 12 months you talk about that it takes had been done.